good evening all. IMSA's content control policies have lately been getting very draconian on the race footage front, fair use be damned, so I'll be re-recording some of those videos affected and reposting as I have time over the next few weeks, also taking advantage of additional photos where available. But for the Corvette Daytona Prototype video, I wanted to expand it and look at the Daytona Prototype class on the whole, so that's why this is coming out on a Wednesday, and that video is probably coming this Friday. 10 years after the first generation of Daytona Prototype broke cover in 2002, themselves intended as a lower-cost replacement class for the Le Mans Prototype-derived sports racing prototype classes of the late 90s, the generally boxy and, in my opinion, rather ungainly-looking DPs received their biggest shake-up yet, with the introduction of the Corvette Daytona Prototype as part of the DP Gen 3 rules. A relaxation of the regulations regarding styling cues and simplifying aero packages to better relate to manufacturer design languages, which definitely isn't something that we've heard more recently in, say, the LMDH rules or the hypercar rules, sufficiently enticed the fine folks over at the Corvette part of General Motors to return as a full constructor in prototype racing for the first time since the 1980s, which is when they last raced during the final iteration of the GTP class. Of course, now GTP is back for LMDH, but that's beside the point. Allegedly, this initiative came about because of an entreaty from Jim France, he of NASCAR and Grand Am Race Series leadership, to the director of General Motors Racing, as he wished to take his Daytona prototypes in an aesthetic direction that was more classically prototypey. And Chevy got the call instead of Cadillac, presumably because Cadillac still had something of a bad taste in their mouth over their failed Le Mans prototype from the late 90s. It's also worth noting that General Motors had been participating in the earlier form of DP by contributing engines under the Pontiac brand, but they folded Pontiac in 2010, so bang goes that idea. This new, more prototypey body was also apparently a rework of a shelved Le Mans prototype design that Corvette and Pratt & Miller had collaborated on in the late 2000s as an extension of their contemporaneous and enormously successful GT1 program before the ACO backpedaled on the proposed rule set changes that would have allowed it, again surprising nobody. In keeping with the rather pick and mix nature of the Daytona Prototype rule set, which we'll cover further in the deep dive video, the new vehicle was available from 3 chassis constructors, Toyota, Dallara, or Riley, all of which underpinned this rather fetching coupe body. As with all Daytona prototypes, the chassis itself was a steel tube frame rather than a monocoque. This helped keep costs down from both a construction and a research and development front, but it did add weight relative to a carbon tub. The engine, unsurprisingly for a Corvette-badged race car, was an LS9-based naturally aspirated 5.5-liter
V8 motor,
tuned by ECR Racing to produce between 530 and 550 horsepower in its original form, with a red line of 7,500 RPM. All of our other normal race car bits were there as well. A 5-speed sequential gearbox from either X-Track or MCO, double wishbone and pushrod suspension on all 4 wheels, and big steel brakes, as carbon brakes were not allowed in the original DP rules, again, in the interest of keeping costs down. The first cars were ready for their competition debut in the Grand Am Series in 2012, and initially fared all right, but not outstandingly well against the slightly older but more generally reliable competition. The cars really started to come good after the convergence that gave rise to the Tudor Sports Car Championship that has survived, albeit with some name changes to this day, when they found themselves now competing in a unified prototype class against former LMP2 cars. This also brought a raft of updates and changes to the Corvette in the interests of balancing performance, including more power, pushing 600 at this point, the aforementioned carbon brakes, an uprated clutch and 6th speed for the transmission, and an improved aero package that featured a large rear diffuser and a dual-element rear wing, both seen here. As Jim Thykson noted in a comment on the original video, the return of big-name manufacturer involvement to Grand Am and the Corvette's general success saw a drop-off of interest from other legacy DP manufacturers. And with the addition of LMP2 competitors through convergence between Grand Am and the ALMS, well, worlds colliding does reinforce the principle of survival of the fittest. The enhancements helped the Corvette DP come alive, admittedly not without some initial difficulties with unexpected aerodynamic consequences at the first Daytona test, and it clinched a 1-2-3-4 in the inaugural race of the Tudor Series at the 24 Hours of Daytona in 2014, with all three of the podium cars finishing on the same lap. Corvettes would go on to take 6 victories of the 11 races in the series, with even greater success the next year. Although they failed to win at the season opener at Daytona, they dominated the rest of the season. The only team not running Corvette prototypes to secure a win in 2015 was the Chip Ganassi squad, running slightly older Ford machinery that took that Daytona win, as well as a victory at the Circuit of the Americas. The number 90 Fresh from Florida sponsored car, somewhere in this 2012 to 2017 gap, 2012 to 2017 state of its existence, also had the niftiest start-stop pit board ever, in the shape of the state of Florida, but as mentioned in the original video, I still, for the life of me, can't find any footage or images of it. So please do comment if you know when this was used so I can go grab a screen cap or image or something to put in a later video as evidence, because it was really, really cool. Anyway, 2016 was similarly successful, and in total, Corvette DPs took home 30 wins from the 45 races in which they competed before they were replaced with the introduction of the Daytona Prototype International class in 2017. It was then that General Motors took the opportunity to refocus the Corvette brand back to exclusively GT racing, instead reviving Cadillac as their prototype brand and using a mandatory spec LMP2 chassis sourced from Dallara. While now 2 generations obsolete and only in competition for 5 years, the Corvette DP nevertheless proved or reproved to General Motors the value of a top-flight prototype program, which gave us the Cadillac DPI, also high on the list for a refreshed video due to IMSA's tightening of the content thumbscrews, and of course it was replaced in 2023 by the current V-Series R. Several of the Corvettes made it into private hands as well, and race at historic events, certainly in the US and possibly abroad? Not sure. Probably not. Photos for this video come from Road Atlanta and Sebring Historics, with the number 33 Wayland liveried car the most frequent competitor and entrant, and particularly well driven, not infrequently giving the R8 a run for its money. That brings us to the end of another video. Please join me on Friday at 6 Eastern for a deeper dive into all the Daytona prototypes, and for this week's call to action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube. As always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.